What's up everyone, this is SuperTal3 here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are beginning the first episode in the series entitled Learn Splunk. In this series I aim to take you all the way from a very beginner to an intermediate to semi-advanced level Splunk user, so that way you'll know how to do things like set up a distributed Splunk deployment, do some things on the back end, as well as run searches, make dashboards, install apps, a ton of things like that. In today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the architecture of a distributed Splunk deployment, which is the most common model seen across large enterprises. You can run Splunk on a single host, so you just have your one host, performs all the functions of a distributed deployment, but obviously that doesn't make sense if you're taking a large amount of data, because you don't have a way to expand that very easily like you do with the distributed deployment. So today we're going to go over the different machines that you're going to need for your distributed deployment and how exactly all that functions together to make a working Splunk deployment. I highly encourage you to watch to the very end of this video because the whole video is jam-packed with tons of useful information on Splunk. Also, leave a like if you want me to make more Splunk videos. I'm planning to continue this series for quite a while. I'm going to show you everything from the design architecture of a Splunk deployment all the way up into building your own deployment, pushing out apps, getting logs flowing in, etc., so that you have everything you need to know to become a junior Splunk engineer. So let's hop right on over into my virtual whiteboard so I can start explaining the topics. Here we are at my virtual whiteboard, kicking off the first episode of my Learn Splunk series. In this episode, entitled Architecture Overview, we are going to go over the architecture needed for a distributed Splunk deployment. The distributed Splunk deployment is the most common model because of its scalability. The first item on our diagram is the deployment server. Its job is to manage all of the other components of the deployment except the indexers. That job is fulfilled by the cluster master. It manages the indexers by updating the indexes.conf file, restarting indexers when necessary, etc. The indexer's job is to store the data, also known as logs, and organize that data in an easily searchable way. Next up is the search head, which is what you will use to interface with the data through searches, dashboards, and reports, etc. The heavy forwarder takes in any data received from the universal forwarders and or API calls, while the Syslog forwarder takes in all Syslog data. These red lines are management lines, so they show how the machines in Splunk are managed. As you can see, the deployment server manages everything except the indexes, which the cluster master takes care of managing. I'll go ahead and draw the universal forwarders, which I forgot to do earlier. They're usually installed on Windows PCs, servers, or domain controllers, etc., and send data like win event logs to the heavy forwarder for processing before that in turn gets sent to the indexers for storage. Now I'll go ahead and use this blue marker to segment the deployment by the data paths. First, we have the data storage section because the indexes store the data. That's their job. Next, as you can see, data is sent from the heavy forwarder and Syslog forwarder to the data storage area. This is the data input section with the heavy forwarder and Syslog forwarder, where data is inputted and processed before being sent to the data storage area. Finally, we have the data interface area, the search head, where we interface with the data through searches, etc. I'm going to go ahead and add the universal forwarders to the data input section because they really are a part of data input. I'll go ahead and draw a little tunnel from the search head to the data storage area because you're interfacing with data, pulling it back to the search head so that you can view your searches. The deployment server manages everything, so I'll go ahead and indicate that on our diagram right there. The deployment server manages the entire deployment except the indexes. It does this through server classes, which allow it to group together the machines in the deployment to push out apps which contain configurations for those destination machines. The cluster master handles all of the management of the indexers, like pushing. Next, we have the heavy forwarder, which receives logs from the universal forwarders. It also runs all API calls made by the Splunk deployment and can even get logs through an external API call. From there, it processes all the logs and sends those to the indexers for storage. The Syslog Forwarders job is to receive the syslog, typically over UDP port 514, although that can be changed depending on your needs and use case. From there, it sends the data to the indexes to be indexed and stored. The syslog server typically utilizes syslog ng as a syslog server to take those logs in, and then the Splunk forwarder runs on the syslog server to forward the data to the indexes. The indexes in a typical Splunk setup store the Splunk data in 4 different categories, also known as buckets. They are hot, warm, cold, and frozen, with hot being the latest data such as the past 24 hours that you are searching very often being stored on the fastest drives, moving all the way down to frozen, which is often stored on slower hard drives and compressed because it will likely not be searched anymore. We'll get to this more in a later video. Lastly, we have the search head, where you interface with the data through searches, dashboards, reports, and alerts. As with most of the components in this video, the search head will be covered in more depth in a future video. Thank you for watching the first episode of my Learn Splunk series. Please like the video if you enjoyed it or learned from it, and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Also, follow me on Twitter at SuperTal3 for updates on the channel. Thanks for watching. This is SuperTal3 signing out.